It was raining as Zin made his way to the great ponds behind the school. The webbing between his fingers felt so cool in the rain, and his gills sputtered with delight. He loved nature, especially the gumpies. They were kind of dumb and always had silly looks on their faces. He wished they lived in the swamp under his hut, but they preferred shallower puddles. Their heavy, smooth bodies and enormous flippers preferred to roll around in the mud. Zin knew the route through the rainforest well, but today, when he came upon the clearing of the great ponds, his heart sank. 3 unruly boys from his school stood around the body of a large bull gumpy. Zin immediately recognized the dead creature. Fant, he called him. He had sat with him for hours and even fed him on multiple occasions. His body now lay sideways in the mud, a rope around his neck. Zin recognized the boys, Tyr, Gop, and Glow. They had often tormented him at recess, and he hid in the bushes so they wouldn't see him. They stood around the animal's carcass and laughed and jeered. They then cracked open a foul stone, rubbing it against their gills to get high. Over the rain, Zin could hear the mournful honks of the other gumpies, too afraid to approach and relegated further into the swamp. A young pup came flapping up from the forest behind him to where he hid in the bushes. It was one of Fant's orphans who must have fled into the forest away from the pond. He looked up at Zin with big, somber eyes, unable to get home to the puddles as long as those boys remained there. The pup recognized Zin and sat down beside him. Zin tried to comfort the pup, stroking the top of its head, but he just kept seething with rage. After some hours of waiting, the bullies went their separate ways, moving in separate directions towards their various neighborhoods of swamps surrounding the school. Zin lifted the young pup and carried him over to the pond, setting him down in the mud next to the corpse of his father. Zin untied the rope around Fant's neck as the other gumpies emerged from deeper into the puddles. Honks of distress flooded the air as they surrounded their dead patriarch. Zin couldn't look at them. He felt too ashamed, embarrassed to be part of such a cruel species. He couldn't help but think that a non-sentient creature would never have done this to a sentient creature. Only sentient life was capable of cruelty, intentionally going out of one's way to cause elaborate harm. He noted one of Tyr's footprints in the mud, leading back to his house, and now, seething coldly, he began to follow it. He left the gumpies to mourn and made his way through the woods, carefully tracking his classmate. The trail led east through the woods and out to the Murkwater subdivision. A few more footprints lingered in the mud at the water's edge, then disappeared into the water. Zin knelt down and buried his face in the footprint, gathering up the scent of the pheromones, then slipped into the corridors of water. It seemed there was about 150 others living in this swamp, but Zin carefully held the memory of Tyr's pheromones at the forefront of his mind. He closed his eyes, moving towards their source. Warmer, colder, warmer, warmer, warmer. Finally, he found himself at the anchor of the hut, the subnautical column of sticks bearing an entrance to the above-ground hut. He circumnavigated it, using his nose until he found the entrance. Slowly and quietly, Zin crept up into the hut. Tyr had already fallen asleep and lay faced away from the watering hole, blowing bubbles out his gills. Zin retrieved a wet piece of tarp from the floor and wrapped it quickly around Tyr's neck. It took his classmate about 5 seconds to wake up, and when he did and realized he was suffocating, he began to claw at Zin's hands. It wasn't enough. Zin was too determined, and Tyr suffocated in less than a minute. Zin slinked back into the dark water and made his way back out to the great ponds in the dark sky. But at this point, rain had washed away the other footprints. He sat with his friends the gumpies a little longer, and then went home. Tyr was found dead in his hut the next morning, and Zin's pheromones were at the scene of the crime. He was found guilty and sentenced to a life in prison. He was shuttled to a prison in orbit to live out the rest of his days rotting away at the precipice of space. But even there, he never made a friend of his own kind. He was quiet and bore a grim expression. None of the other prisoners bothered with him, And after 5 years there, Zin found himself hating his own people even more. The way they scrapped over the rations and postured their superiority over each other, their conniving and their schemes. It only affirmed in his mind that sentient life in the universe was a plague, a mistake to be corrected. 5 years and 3 months into his sentence, a stray asteroid struck the prison. No one saw it coming. The entire starboard wing of the space station was blown clean off, and among those living there were no survivors. The airlocks tightened as alarm bells rung, and a black fog from outside crept into Zin's cell. He backed into the corner of the room and held his gills shut, but when 30 seconds had passed, he couldn't handle it. He inhaled the black gas, noting that it tasted of metal. Half an hour later, as crews rushed to put out fires and maintain seals, Zin felt sick. His gills were quivering and something was moving inside him. Pressure was building on the left side of his neck, bulging against the opening of his gills. An eel forced its way out of him and into the air. It slipped between the bars of his prison cell and disappeared. Over the next year, things in the prison more or less returned to normal, although Zin noticed sometimes when he exercised that black veins would appear just under the surface of his skin. 6.5 years into his prison sentence, the lost wing had been rebuilt, and a fresh shipment of inmates arrived from the planet below. Among them was Gob, one of the 3 bullies who had killed Fant all those years ago. Zin couldn't take his eyes off him as they waltzed down past his cell. His heart throbbed and the black soot clouded his veins. He couldn't sleep. Still agitated well into the night, Zin could smell Gob's pheromones in the air just down the hall. All he needed to do was wait for the next meal or recreation time, and he could have his revenge. But Zin was too impatient. His breathing was deep and slow. He approached the bars of his cell, black blood pulsing, and bent them to fit through. He crept silently down the hall to where Gob sat, unable to sleep in his first night in prison. "Who are you?" Gob didn't recognize him. A lockdown alarm sounded as a guard must have found the bars of Zin's cell bent, and a look of fear crept across Gob's face. With the strength of the void, Zin bent the bars on Gob's cell and killed him. "Come to me," a voice rang in his head, and suddenly he was imbued with a clairvoyant wisdom. He knew the location of every vent, every camera, every guard, and he was able to escape. He slipped through an airlock outside the space station to locate the source of the voice. Somehow, he was able to breathe in space. He gazed down towards the dark side of the blue planet he had once called home, but the voice was not coming from there. He turned around and nearly had a heart attack. The giant face of an anglerfish, almost as large as the planet he had just viewed, and dimly illuminated by the sun, loomed in the distance, although he couldn't quite tell how far away it was. "I greet you, Zin Ud Ubyx. Perhaps you remember me. My name is Ud Ubyx Grata, and you are my Void Mother." Zin's mind raced, thinking back to the time he had exhaled the eel. "Come with me and do my bidding, and I will help bring an end to this abominable universe." Zin was trembling with rage, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I pledge my service to you, Ud Ubyx Grata. I have but one additional request. Devour this planet before us." A powerful force yanked Zin into deep space, compressed by gravity against the tail of Ud Ubyx Grata. The tail curled around his body, and Ud Ubyx Grata moved toward the planet. It passed between his fangs like a speck of dust and was never seen again. Swimming through space, the great eel carried Zin to a strange, uninhabited world. A brown dwarf that sat stationary within Boot's void. The eel shielded the body of his void mother before tossing it into an ocean of methane. Zin washed ashore, and when he came to, he gazed up at the night sky, at the great eel gazing down upon him. "I have chosen to hide you here. It is a safe place where you may live out your days. You are free to move and build whatever you want, and practice wielding the power of the void. As long as you live, I may not die. I know that you are a holy man, Ud Ubyx. As you remain here, I will carry out your will. There are many that would have this universe exist forever. I will stop them. My comrades and I will put an end to it. And so, Ud Ubyx did as he was told. He built a great cathedral at the hill atop the swamps and meditated on the void. In the absence of air, breathing it into his being, he found over time that he did not need to eat either. 11 billion years passed, and Ud Ubyx lived as a monk, having lost all concept of time, having forgotten his own name. But one day, while meditating in the cathedral, there was an anomaly in the void. He had not seen another sentient creature other than Ud Ubyx Grata in the longest time, but the void right before him was taking the shape of a creature not so unlike him. Its energy was hostile. It saw him as an enemy. He could feel its source, resonating in a galaxy hundreds of millions of light years away. But just as he rose to confront the specter, it vanished. An anomaly like this was never a coincidence. Zin knew something was coming, but he didn't know what. He stepped out of the cathedral and onto the quiet hill to gaze up at the starless sky. There was movement in Boot's void. A massive creature, 1/5 the size of his master, was approaching. He could see in the darkness a long spindly torso and 4 spindly arms. It was a weaver, one of the enemies of Ud Ubyx Grata that he had been warned about so many times, but it was coming from the direction of the Corona Borealis supercluster, not the Virgo cluster from where the anomaly had occurred in the cathedral. The great, stoic face of the weaver appeared in the sky as its arms coiled back. Ud Ubyx roared, and his black blood frothed. He leapt into the atmosphere just as the hands of the weaver collapsed over the planet, pulverizing it into a dust with one swoop. Across the void, on a small desert planet in the Andromeda galaxy, Nick sat trembling in the morning twilight, hearing the counsel of Ubyx.
I have sent one of my weavers to destroy the planet. We should hear from him soon.
Nick scrambled to wake James up and let him know what was going on. But no sooner had James arisen that Ubyx had an update.
The planet was destroyed, but my comrade believes the Void Mother may have escaped. It seems that even in dream he was able to track you, Ud Ubyx. It would seem he is on his way here, but do not be afraid. My spinstresses were designed for a task such as slaying a Void Mother.
Every spinstress around stood at attention, on high alert.
Ud Ubyx, I do not know what will happen, but I advise you and your friend James to wait on your ship. I cannot guarantee your safety when the Void Mother of Ud Ubyx Grata arrives, but I will do everything in my power to kill him. If that means I must destroy this planet, I will see to it that you are teleported to safety before I do so.
Nick and James ran for their lives down the steps of the stone ruins, stumbling in the desert, their little hearts beating hard. It was getting brighter out as the sun was rising, and then again, brighter still. A meteor was tearing across the sky, burning bright like a magnesium fire. "Get away from me, James," Nick panicked. "No, I'm not gonna leave you. He's after me, James. Get away." Nick breathed deep and hard, black blood pumping in his veins. He turned around as James continued to run towards the ship. A kilometer behind him, the meteor collapsed into the sand. The Void Mothers glared at one another. The monk stood before Nick, clothes singed off. He was an aquatic alien. Ud Ubyx roared, dimming the star on the horizon.